Good morning. This morning I talk about St. Bonaventure. Now his feast is July 15th, and I read about him last week. I just couldn't put him on my mind, so I just wanted to share a little bit with you about him. St. Bonaventure was born Giovanni da Fidanza in pretty much in central Italy. Now this is around the year 1221. Well, it is the year 1221. And when he goes, we know very little of his growing up time. But when he goes off to college, he goes to the University of Paris, he becomes very interested in the Franciscans and decides to join the order, and he does so. The Franciscans, experiencing him, realize this is a pretty sharp fellow, so they send him back to Paris for study under a theologian, Alexander of Hales, and it was also a Franciscan. And he goes on and becomes so sharp at this and so good in terms of catching something in the essence of God, so well articulated that he is made the head of the whole school. So he's a master of this school. And this is about 10 years after he started there. Shortly after that, at the age of only 36, they put him as head of the whole order of Franciscans. And at this time, this had been growing just geometrically. And while the order had been growing, one of the issues was it was almost like splitting in half. It was having a tremendous amount of stress. And the stress came from some of those who wanted to follow Francis and just have absolute poverty, have absolutely no rules, and just basically have like an anarchy type. And then there's the other sides who wanted to be a lot more practical, and you have to have certain things in order to get by. Well, Bonaventure does an interesting thing. He kind of tracks away half through. He personally is highly, excuse me, he is very poverty ridden. He doesn't associate with any possessions. He doesn't even associate with the rich. He's very much himself, personally very good, but he steers a middle-of-the-road plan. And at this time, a lot of the general clergy were not educated, and so there was a fair amount of ignorance and then not well thought-out things being said. So he very much was in favor of study, which was not a high emphasis of Francis at all. Francis admired study, but he thought that prayer was so much more important. And Bonaventure doesn't disagree with this, but he does steer, what I say, this middle ground. Because he's made head of the order, he doesn't get to be the major theologian that he might have become. He did write some major works. He wrote one on Peter Lombard's sentences. He wrote another on abbreviated statements. But his most famous is one called The Journey of the Mind Toward God. And in this, he's got 3 different steps he goes through. The first step would be one of purification. As you want to get free from sin, you want to purify yourself. And that gives you a certain calmness. You get illumination, which gives you a certain splendor of the truth. You just get, raptured by it. And the last is union with God, which leads to a sweetness of love. Now, what's interesting is he went, and he's in Paris around the same time as Thomas Aquinas. Now, Thomas Aquinas took the philosophies of Aristotle and developed them with all kinds of logic and came out with some answers. Bonaventure is very different than that. He doesn't buy into the fact that you use reason to get to God. He uses the fact that you use affection, you use prayer, you use love to get to God. And so these approaches are very, very different. In the modern way of saying it, and I'm trying to think if this is Thomas Merton or who said it, but they say that rapture can get you further along than reason can ever take you. And it's an interesting point in the fact that if we can just feel it and pray, we don't have to go through all the logic steps. Because we all know from the Old Testament on that, we can't get into the mind of God. We can study God, but we can't get into the mind of God. We can't actually get to this whole wonderful interior feeling, which is like on the edges of mysticism or mystics and or type of prayer that we'd all like to get to. We can't easily get there by just saying, whoa, let's see, if I do this and I do this and then add this and this, oh, well, then I get there. You can't do that. It does take a fair amount of effort, but it also takes an acceptance that God has to do a lot of that work, that moving us along is God's work. Now, there was a conference or a council held in Lyons around 1274, and both Thomas Aquinas and St. Bonaventure, who by this time is made a cardinal, as a sideline for a second. There's a funny story where he is asked to be a bishop, I think in 1265, and by Pope Clement, and he refuses. He says, I'm not going to be a bishop, no way. In 1273, the Pope at that time, Pope Gregory X, gave orders that he was to accept and not only be a bishop, but be a cardinal and of Albano, wherever that is. And when they came, the people came with his red hat and all this stuff, they find that he's doing dishes. He says, oh, no, I can't see you now. I got to finish the job first. So he finishes doing dishes at this monastery where he is. It just shows you his approach to an appreciation of little things of serving. And so anyway, he does take it on. They both, Thomas Aquinas and he both go to the Council of Lyons. Thomas Aquinas dies on the trip there. And what this council was trying to do is the church in the east and the church in the west, the Roman church, were kind of separate, and they were trying to bring these together. So they made agreements, they did all kinds of work, and they got them together. Unfortunately, Bonaventure will die after about a year into this, and the Eastern Church 10 years later will reject it, and the Western Church in a few years later will actually have two different popes, so they will go into their own crisis. So a lot of the work of this great council trying to have a unity, and it's interesting how in Augustinian type of approach, the approach that St. Augustine would push forward was very much in line with Bonaventure's approach. And he would go for unity, truth, and love as the three main things to try to get there. Unity, truth, and love. And it's interesting, I think more and more the fact that we're all united, and the more that we can make a way between all the extremes that we face, the better we can be united, the better we can approach truth, and the more we can just love each other. And if we can do that, in any way, not only in some great theological way, but just in our day-to-day as we face conflict, that we look at that middle road that brings us all together and brings us that calmness of peace. It brings us to a sweetness of love. It brings us to a good feeling. I think one of the great things that he's famous for is a little quote. He says, "A spiritual joy is the greatest sign of divine grace dwelling in the soul." So let us have joy today.